Hey there, and welcome to The Hash on CoinDesk TV. It's great to be back with you. We are joined today by Naomi, Brockwell, Will Foxley, Jen Sanasie, and our special guest, David Z. Morris. He's filling in for some of us this week, so that's going to be great. Let's kick this thing off. I think we're going to start in the world of the regulatory. Let's do it, Naomi. What do you got from the OCC?
What have we got? So Michael Hsu, who's the acting comptroller from the US Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, has increasingly been talking about coordination between government agencies. He said that he wants to increase oversight of the crypto market. He would like US officials to work in lockstep to set a regulatory perimeter for cryptocurrencies. Currently, he's been talking about the piecemeal regulations we have at the moment, saying that agencies are creating their own interpretive guidance and rulemaking. There isn't any federal legislation to define authority or jurisdiction. He wants to change this by doing some sort of a collaboration between different departments in government. I'm not sure how I feel about this. It could be great. It could be great. And they get on the same page and they're like, hey, we all decide crypto should be free and you guys could do what you want. Or it could be real bad and they all come together and do some bad stuff and start cracking down. I'm going to throw this to the group to get your thoughts. Zach, let's start with you. What do you think is going to come from this and from this increased oversight that Michael Hsu has been talking about?
I mean, one would hope that a coherent policy would emerge from it, but hey, I don't know if we have much optimism there for that. But I think it would be nice if a bunch of these agencies would get on the same page as it relates to regulating this industry, and that a clear set of guidelines, perimeter even for innovation in which to occur would be very helpful as people try to figure out what's what here. But again, I mean, I don't know if that necessarily is going to be the case. There's definitely going to be a lot of cooks in this kitchen. And if there is some coherent strategy that emerges from it, I think the industry will benefit from that. Whether that will happen is certainly an open question. I saw Will shaking his head. Do you want to take the flip side of that coin, Will?
Yeah, well, I just want to reflect on last week at Consensus, where we saw some other comments from Brian Brooks, who's now the CEO at Binance US. And he's kind of hopped in and out of crypto over the years. And of course, he was formerly the OCC, like the comptroller of the currency for the US. And he moved in some really big regulatory moves where he was like, okay, you can use these public blockchains for settling transactions with banks, which was huge news at the time. And a lot of people saw that as an impetus for kind of the bull run that we've been on lately, because banks got an okay to go and use these public blockchains for the first time from a regulator. And now we're kind of seeing some different comments here. This is more of like a kind of step back. Let's kind of see how we want to regulate these public blockchains. Of course, there's different ways of like regulating. There's different ways of thinking about the concepts here. The US has 3 different branches of government. And then besides that itself, you have like your federal, your state, and your local level, and everything. Everyone has their own way of interpreting laws and acting those laws out. So his comments seem very streamlined and like easy to look at. Like, we'd like one system for kind of looking at public blockchains and how to regulate them. That would make things very simple, but it might not be the best system for keeping the balance of powers intact. Every state has its own regulations for a reason, because every state has its own industries at play and has its own population it has to be responsible for. But give it to you, Naomi.
Yeah, just on that note, Will, I mean, it's a question of, are they going to be more inclined to follow what Wyoming is doing regarding blockchain, or are they going to be more likely to be influenced by what New York is doing? Because they're 2 very different systems. I would much rather piecemeal and have companies to have the ability to relocate if regulation gets bad, the same way that Kraken left New York when the Bit license came into play in New York and headed out west, and now they're moving to Wyoming. I would much rather that system than some draconian system that's imposed from the top down where no one gets a choice. And the only option, if it doesn't work, is for companies to leave the US, which would really be devastating. So I honestly think New York has a much better chance of influencing what happens. They're, much more powerful state government. And so, we can be pie in the sky and think, well, it would be great to have cohesion and all of that, but it might not if it's cohesing on something that's really bad for the crypto industry, which does seem possible. And even Brooks said, all this talk about potentially rolling back all the stuff that he passed at the late stages of his tenure as acting controller. They're saying that, well, maybe we shouldn't allow banks to have crypto custody. And so Brian Brooks at Consensus this year responded to that and said, not only is that a crazy idea to not accept a national bank as a member of the Federal Reserve because it's engaged in crypto custody, but it's also dangerous. And I happen to agree with Brian Brooks on that one. So, I'm not too optimistic about this idea of more regulatory oversight and cohesion at the federal level. But Jen, I'll throw to you. What are your thoughts?
I tend to agree with Zack. I mean, we always talk about this lack of clarity when it comes to regulation. And to me, this piecemeal kind of regulation we have in the States adds to that lack of clarity. I know I'm always on the optimistic side on this show, but I would love to see these agencies come together and work on Hester Peirce's safe harbor proposal. That's like my ideal kind of future. That. I think that would be awesome. But it just sounds like everyone keeps talking about it, and it sounds like the government just needs a really great project manager to be like, okay, cool, we should do this. What are the next steps? Like, what is actually going to happen next? Because it feels like we just keep talking around the same topics over and over again.
I don't know that that's ever going to happen, Jen, but I like your
know.
optimism.
That's my wishful thinking.
David, do you have any thoughts on this and the future of the regulatory landscape at the federal level for crypto?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody has pretty much covered it. And I would tend to agree that, like, the consistency is the most important part here, especially, I mean, and that's from a business perspective, just to be clear. Like, individuals could definitely be negatively impacted by regulations in a way that is not intended. But for businesses who are trying to build something, it's hugely important to have that consistency. And just to throw this out there, but there's an interesting parallel we got that I wrote about recently last year in China when Ant Group, which is a financial services company, was about to go public. And they thought everything was fine. And then all of a sudden, the CCP comes in and decides that it's not fine, changes the rules, and Jack Ma is not seen for a little while. So that's just an example of, like, the need for consistency to run a business.
Well, that's also an argument against an authoritarian top-down approach, because no one in China can really, avoid it. They can't go to a different area. They can't just go to Shenzhen and say, oh, well, the laws are better here. They were kind of stopped from doing their IPO and didn't really have recourse, which gets a bit scary and why I kind of push back against any sort of top-down authoritarian approach. But we'll see what happens, and let's change track, go to something that's a bit exciting. Jen, what have we got here?
Well, first I want to say it sounded like someone's cat wanted to weigh in on that conversation. So maybe we'll have a furry friend to make an appearance.
Okay, yeah, he's jealous of any competing attention. So this is Steve.
Steve.
Come on,
He doesn't comprehend two-dimensional images, so
Steve is great.
I love Steve. All right,
Jen,
okay.
Weigh in and then we'll have Steve's opinion.
All right. So Coinbase's Visa debit card now works with Apple Pay and Google Pay. They said starting this week, the crypto exchange is going to offer crypto rewards to people who are on the wait list also. So just some background on this card. People signed up on the wait list to get the Coinbase Visa debit card. Now they're saying it's going to work with Apple Pay and Google Pay at any point of sale. So when you go to make a transaction, you can convert your crypto to fiat and buy whatever it is that you would like to buy. Naomi, I'm going to kick this right off to you. What do you think about this new development?
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, as we know, BitPay already works through Apple Pay with their Visa debit card. But Visa and MasterCard, it's so funny. We talk about crypto as being like, it's an alternative to these payment processors and these point of sale systems and all of that. And yet Visa and MasterCard, once they got on board the crypto train, have been the ones facilitating all of this. It takes a long time for merchants to want to add different point of sale applications and terminals and things like that. It seems that Visa and MasterCard really still are the channel through which people are doing this, and we're not away from that. I'm looking forward to a time when we don't need Visa and MasterCard and we have more competition in the marketplace in terms of different fee structures, of things that are perhaps decentralized and not centralized entities. But I still think it's a positive development. I'm excited to see crypto be accepted at more places without the merchants even having to be on board with that. But David, I'll throw it to you and Steve.
So I have Steve has a question. I mean, my big question here is just sort of a user perspective. I mean, this is such a cliche, but with volatility sort of being what it is in crypto, I mean, if you're a person using this card, are you like sitting there looking at like CoinGecko to try and figure out what's happening with BTC before you buy like a hard disk or something? That's a real question for me, because like it just seems to add another layer of complexity, and I just wonder how people perceive that. I have another question, but I'll leave it till the next one.
I'll take
Zack.
it.
Oh, do I do the handoff?
I'll take it. I'll take it. I mean, I'm very bearish on like crypto payments generally, but where this gets potentially interesting is with USDC, right? If you're using a stable coin, in your Coinbase account to make purchases at any number of retailers with the ease of tapping your iPhone to the scanner, maybe that's potentially transformative. I think USDC is certainly gaining momentum. There's becoming a lot of applications on the internet that are using USDC, whether it's Dapper Labs, NBA Top Shot, at Blockfolio recently announcing USDC integration. There are ways to transfer your dollars into these digitized dollars and potentially spend them in a way that would make sense. I'm a little bit unclear on like what the tax implications of spending stablecoins are, and I don't know if there's any clear guidance on that yet. I think Naomi may have more experience with that, but I think on the stablecoin side, this could get interesting if momentum around USDC in particular picks up. But I'll toss this to Naomi.
Yeah, I'll throw it to Jen first, and then I'll weigh in on the tax and other things.
I just wanted to give some clarity there. So if you're using USDC through the card, there's no fee associated with it. If you're using any other crypto, there's a 2.49% fee to kind of change that crypto into fiat. Yeah. And then also the tax implication. So I know, Naomi, you're going to talk more about taxes, but my question is, people who are using this card, like how are they going to know how to report their transactions for taxes? I just feel like there's a lot of confusion there that makes it harder for the mainstream audience who might want to use something like this. But Naomi, back to you.
Yeah, well, with, stablecoins is interesting, and the guidelines aren't particularly clear at all around this, but people are, legislate, what's the word I'm looking for? They're in the process of figuring this out, and so it's most likely going to be a like-for-like exchange, which means it's not taxable. So like a stablecoin for US dollar, it's basically the same price. So even if you do report it, I mean, it's basically going to be the same, even if it's reportable, but it's likely that it's not going to be reportable because it's a like-for-like exchange. But a lot of people, when you're talking about, are they looking at the price before they make a purchase? I don't know anyone who's going to be spending this as everyday currency who got it in 2021. They're not going to be like, is it at 36 today or 38? Like the people who are using this have probably bought their crypto at $1 or $200 or maybe $1,000. You know, they've been in since 2013. They're all the people that I know who are doing this. So yeah, it doesn't matter what the price is doing at any given time. They're still making a boatload by spending this, even if they have to pay 30% capital gains at the end of the day, or however much capital gains is. But Zack, I'll throw this to you.
Yeah, on the fees thing, that's interesting. There's some rewards associated with this. I think they're more favorable. You get a higher rewards if you take it in XLM, Stellar's native currency. I think there's also Bitcoin rewards associated with it. But maybe that'll sort of like nudge the needle here. Again, bearish on crypto for payments, but if the calculation is there where you can get crypto as a reward for spending, hey, maybe that would get you off the fence toward spending that cryptocurrency as opposed to treating it as an asset. David, I think you had something to say, so I'm going to toss it right up to you.
I have a very brief comment, which is that hopefully, if you're in the category that Naomi described, go nuts. But if you're at all financially detail oriented, 3% is an insane fee to be able to spend your crypto. So, I mean, I don't know if I am allowed to say this, but I would not recommend that.
Yeah, say away. I
You're
agree.
allowed.
It's crazy. That's
Anything
why we
goes
need
on the hash.
alternatives for Visa and
Steve said
MasterCard.
that.
But I will also add that there are already lots of rewards that are pushing people into the consumer sphere. Places like Purse, places like BitRefill, they all offer rewards back. That's why so many people I know are using crypto every day, because they can save 37% on every Amazon purchase they make. They can get 10% every time they, use Lightning. So these things are definitely nudging people because it makes up all of the capital gains that most people would have to pay on this. But Zack, what have we got coming up after the break?
Well, we got a break, and then after the break, we're going to talk about the Human Rights Foundation, its latest round of grants to the Bitcoin developer community. We'll talk about where those grants are going this time. It's quite interesting. So stick with us. It's The Hash, and it is Tuesday. Be right back.
CoinDesk indexes, the market standard for crypto assets since 2014. Our trusted data powers billions in publicly traded funds. CoinDesk indexes are the standard used by institutions, and they're the key for investors looking to understand and access crypto markets.
CoinDesk Bitcoin Price Index, XBX, has been instrumental to Grayscale, enabling investors around the world to access Bitcoin through a regulated, familiar product.
CoinDesk indexes enabled the early adopters to build crypto investment vehicles, and they're already trusted by a new generation of global investors.
Welcome back to The Hash. So before we move over to that conversation, we're going to talk about Marathon, which is a North American-based Bitcoin mining company, and they have a pool, and they were kind of infamous for censoring transactions, or at least attempting to censor transactions on the Bitcoin network in accordance to guidance or perceived guidance and expected guidance from regulatory bodies around the world. But last week, they decided to rescind that policy that had been running for at least a few months. And now they're operating as a full Bitcoin mining pool, accepting any transaction, as well as signaling for Taproot. So let's listen here really quickly to the CEO talking about that decision.
This week, Marathon will be updating all our miners to the full standard Bitcoin Core 0.211 node, including support for Taproot. Additionally, I want to make it clear that by adopting the full standard Bitcoin Core node, we will be validating transactions on the blockchain in the exact same way as all other miners who use the standard node, and we will not be censoring any transactions. The rollout will occur as part of a major system migration.
So you heard it there first. Kind of interesting to see someone walk back their pool's policy. They received a large amount of criticism from the Bitcoin community for their decision to censor transactions by not including transactions into a block. So just kind of taking a step back, it's very difficult to censor transactions on Bitcoin just because anyone has the incentive to package a transaction in the next block. So Marathon and its subsidiaries and associated businesses were taking a loss by choosing not to include some transactions into those blocks. They lose the transaction fees associated with them. And they did that because they were kind of expecting at some point future regulation from government saying, you can't use this transaction, you can't use this transaction. It comes from a blacklisted address, maybe it comes from a nation state like Iran that is blacklisted from using financials tied to the US. So interesting to see them pivot, interesting to see a total about face and kind of a capitulation to what the Bitcoin community in general wants, which is just a completely neutral, sovereign platform for moving money around the world. David, I would like to get your thoughts on this, just as someone who's been in this space for a while.
I unfortunately haven't been following this story, and I don't know much about Marathon, but I would say I think that, at least for me personally, the last 2 years or so have really driven home the point that when you look at an entity there or an industry or whatever, there's the regulatory question, and then there's just the trust and character question. And I think that over the past 2 years, I've really come more to the side that, like, you know, individuals matter, trust matters, culture matters, beliefs matter, maybe even more than the regulators. And, you know, just looking at this on its face, it stuns me that any Bitcoin mining company operating in the United States would ever have chosen to censor transactions. And I think it speaks to, you know, the inner culture. And I mean, you as a cryptocurrency person need to look at that, and regardless of the reversal under pressure, ask whether the people who would have made that decision in the first place are people you want to back or have anything to do with.
Yeah, definitely raising some good points there. I think overall, it just kind of speaks to the decentralized nature of the Bitcoin mining community, and or I should just say Bitcoin in general. If you want to participate in confirming transactions, you can do that. You can plug in and play and start confirming transactions. And so the choice to do this kind of speaks to continued decentralization of that network and the continued desire for people to kind of use Bitcoin as a neutral platform. Naomi, what did you think about Marathon's kind of saga here? They got a lot of hatred from the Bitcoin community for choosing to censor transactions.
Yeah, I can understand why. I mean, Bitcoin is meant to be the uncensorable money, right? And so it kind of goes against the ethos of the crypto community and the culture that David was talking about. I do see on the horizon, it is possible that, governments will start to require that stuff. People are starting to talk about, censoring DeFi and making sure that they're only, non-blacklisted addresses are allowed to move funds in and out of these dexes. And so there is a possible world where we could have two parallel economies, and we have one of them which is censoring and above board, and the other which is completely decentralized and doesn't care. And I think at the end of the day, what that will say is that at the end of the day, this stuff is uncensorable, because as long as someone is packaging this stuff into blocks, then these transactions are going through. So it doesn't matter if there are a handful of players who are against this. And I agree with David's point there. Reputation system is so important when you have unregulated areas, when you have free market mechanisms. And so to have a company that's decided, well, we want to censor people, reputation system's going to play in. They got a lot of hatred. They rolled it back, and there was pressure on them to have better policies that are more in line with what the crypto community wanted. So it's kind of an interesting story in that regard.
Yeah, definitely, David. I thought I saw you have another comment.
Naomi got my point, which is, well, I guess just to expand on it slightly, it's interesting that these fears are so pointless, right? Or these measures are so pointless because one miner censoring, it has zero effect. So I don't know. I don't even understand it as a policy.
Right.
All right, I'll take it from here. Let's do some things. We're going to talk about the Human Rights Foundation, which has been really dabbling in the Bitcoin space for a while now, championed by Alex Gladstein and others at the organization. They made their latest disbursement of grants from their Bitcoin Development Fund, $210,000 in total. But the interesting thing that stood out to me is Arabic translations of Bitcoin content. So this is interesting to my mind for the desire to diversify the sort of the developer base of Bitcoin Core. So this is not new from HRF. They've been doing this for a while. But I'm going to throw this to you, Naomi. I mean, I think the idea here, expanding developer materials into foreign languages, really interesting. That is being translated into Arabic. Also interesting, given the the rise of activity in the Bitcoin space from the Middle East. What's your initial take on the HRF sort of stepping up its grants work here?
Yeah, it's super interesting. I like, as you said, to see more of this spread across the globe. It's obviously going to help decentralization in that regard. There was an interesting thing in this article where they were talking about Khalil working on a wallet purpose-built for his home country of Nigeria. Bitcoin adoption in Nigeria is kind of going crazy right now. If you look at the heat maps across the world and where it's increasing and where it's not, a lot of places in Africa are doing really well right now, thriving in response to political corruption and capital controls and things like that, which is really where cryptocurrency comes in very useful. But it's also interesting to have these decentralized global systems, but perhaps to have applications built on them that are purpose-built for different locations, because obviously different use cases they're going to change as you go to different areas. So it is nice to see that kind of specificity being applied to different areas that could benefit from this. But David, I'll throw this to you for your thoughts.
I was just going to very quickly make the point that I don't know if it was planned this way or intended, but obviously this comes just a few weeks after serious escalation in the Israel-Palestine conflict, and Palestinians are subject to a lot of restrictions, and that includes they use Israeli currency, and there are lots of import-export restrictions. So, again, I won't impute motive, but this certainly just by timing points to something having to do with a reaction to that situation.
Yeah, I'll take another angle on this story, which interested me, was that the Human Rights Foundation is very much so only focused on Bitcoin and the Lightning Network, as opposed to this whole other network out there of different blockchain ecosystems. And to me, I think that kind of like the warrant for that is kind of based on the idea of Bitcoin just being extremely uncensorable. It's 10 years of working time and has essentially zero downtime. The Lightning Network is starting to prove itself as like an actual tool for moving Bitcoin around cheaply and efficiently, whereas people thought 2 years ago Bitcoin was kind of the failed project. So that's interesting to me to see that people are starting to take Lightning seriously, and that Bitcoin, in the eyes of the greater human rights circle and sort of like the greater charity circles, is being seen as like this digital currency in the same way that we've seen like investors kind of pick up the ideas Bitcoin as an investment class.
Yeah, you mentioned the peer-to-peer activity in Nigeria really popping off. There's a great site called Useful Tulips that aggregates a lot of the peer-to-peer marketplace activity. Nigeria is pretty consistently always on top of the peer-to-peer rankings. So interesting to see if payments really take off there, especially on Lightning, which drastically reduces transaction fees associated with sending Bitcoin around. Interesting to see HRF sort of ramp up its radical neutrality, right? So this is not always popular. And I think the political context that David pointed out is a worthy one, right? So if the fact that, sponsoring Arabic translation of Bitcoin implementation, certainly notable. I'll toss this to you, Jen. I know we were talking about, I forget which it was. I think it was PayPal or Venmo was censoring payments, to Palestinian relief efforts, I think last week or the week before. So it does kind of come in this reality in which financial censorship is possible and being demonstrated. So I wanted to toss this to you for your take on this, Grant.
I remember I got so emotional during that story. But I think this is great, right? I think that the developers in the communities that we're talking about know they can see the problems firsthand, and they can start working on the solutions to those problems. And so the conversation around access here is one that's really important. I was going to ask you, Zack, do you think that we're going to see more money being kind of pumped into these communities? I mean, $210,000 is a lot of, it was 210,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, is a lot of money, but I mean, I feel like there's so much more money in the space that could be put towards doing good. Do you think that this is the beginning of a trend that we're going to start to see more of?
I'd certainly hope so. We've seen a lot more developer grants being sponsored by a number of entities in the space. I don't know if there's any sort of like definitive tracking website of all this stuff, but I know just in recent months, as the bull market has sort of surged, there are more grants going to developers, be they in developing countries or even here in the US. So it is incumbent upon some of these players to finance a lot of this development work, and I hope certainly that we see more activity there. Quickly, Naomi, did you have a last thought before we transition?
Yeah, just a last thought in terms of like tracking these things. I mean, it's an inherently decentralized space. You have so many blockchains that have their own grant committees. You have, Dash proposals, which routinely sponsor things in places like Venezuela. You have things like Flipstarter for Bitcoin Cash, which, fundraising tool. So like all of, Zcash as well, they're in grants committee now with Oh my God, or whatever it's called. It's kind of a cool name. But yeah, very decentralized, hard to track, but there's a lot of grants being handed out to make sure that development continues. But let's change track here. Let's go to David. What have we got here?
Okay, so first of all, pump this directly into my veins. It is Christmas around here. Just for very slight context from me, I've just I've joined CoinDesk after a couple of years reporting not entirely on crypto. So it's great to see old friends. And we have Bitconnect promoters in the US getting civil charges filed by the SEC. I'm not going to be able to rattle off all the names, but the list includes Trayvon James, who's perhaps, we have a list here. Trayvon James, who is a big, or was a big YouTube and social media presence, sort of in 2017, 2018. Bitconnect was a Ponzi scheme, to be blunt, and was a very sort of naked Ponzi scheme. And they used a MLM structure of recruiters who they paid large fees to convince people to buy this thing called Bitconnect coin. with their like the details are mind-numbing, and it's clearly a scam as soon as you describe it. But people would send their Bitcoin to Bitconnect, get BCC coins back as interest, which has some strange parallels to yield farming. But the point I think that is my most important takeaway here is the wheels of justice turn slowly. This is 3 years later, so people who are doing bad things now be aware that a knock on the door could come at any time. I think maybe the question that strikes me the most here for everyone else is, is this a relic? Have we seen the last of Bitconnect and other stuff that was so scammy and spammy during the ICO boom? Or is it still, going on just as fast today? And I don't know if somebody wants to jump in, but.
I mean, I'll jump in with the Carlos.
And well.
I can't believe you didn't hit us with the Carlos Mata impression, David. I mean, can we just hear Can we just hear a Bitconnect? Can we get that?
I'm not the guy for that. I think. Yeah, Naomi.
Oh God! There we go. Yeah, no, that was. It really is good to see old friends. I don't know. I mean, I think it is interesting to see. I think your point is spot on, right? Like the wheels of justice turn slowly, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see 3 years from now what the Bitconnect of 2024 is. I think regulation moves slow. Courts move slow. For this to, for the SEC here to have kicked the tires for a number of years and finally issue these charges the day before Memorial Day weekend was really interesting, and I don't think it's going away. Right, this could be what Gary Gensler was alluding to when he said, "Hey, bad actors, watch out." That could have been his little tell about this coming down the pike. But I would imagine that in some years' time, we will see another similar situation in which regulators have turned unfavorably toward a popular project that has brought in large sums of money. Jen, Will, I don't know if that was feeding into you, but someone take it away.
I saw a hand.
We'll grab it there. Yeah, like you guys said, the wheels of justice turn slowly, but they do crush once they catch up to you. And so they're seeking $2 billion in disgorgement and interest. And there's only a few individuals here, and I have a feeling they might not have that money anymore, particularly if they left it in Bitcoin and then the price went down over the next 3 years. So maybe they do have the money, maybe they don't, who knows. I did not read into it that closely, but it's interesting to see some of the names here. Like you said, Trevon James was a huge social media guy in 2017, 2018, well-known. And then Bitconnect itself is just extremely well-known. I think most people who have kind of kept even a semblance of a finger on the space kind of know about the legacy of Bitconnect. In terms of what is going on this year, I think there's a lot of protocols that could kind of fall under this category. I don't know if there are any as big as Bitconnect. Like you said, there's even the GIF is out there because they're just such a well-known MLM scam. But there's a lot of projects on Binance Smart Chain. There's a lot of projects on Ethereum. There's a lot of projects on these decentralized protocols that are doing the exact same thing, just on a smaller scale. And they're much harder to track just because they're on-chain as opposed to on ink and paper.
Last week, we spoke about a Soulja Boy tweet where he was encouraging his fans to take part in a questionable project. And David, I wanted to ask you, for people who have just got into the crypto space and are hearing about the story, what do we take away from this? What can we learn from 2018 to help protect people trying to maneuver the space moving forward?
Well, I think the most important one is just to look at what's being promised. The insane thing about Bitconnect is they were promising 40% monthly returns, which compounds to something like 300.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and so awesome. When you're being offered those kinds of returns, it is a scam. It is very simple. Self-protection is just about having some basic insight into how investment works, which, easier said than done. But, if you're being offered something that's too good to be true, it's too good to be true. Joanne, I've seen some APYs in DeFi that would make you blush, David, if you're saying 40 is the threshold. Right. But I'll throw this down to Naomi. Yeah. Well, I would actually. Can I follow up real quick?
My tokens.
The DeFi thing is a very important point because you're getting returns based on risk. And Bitconnect actually promised safe investing, which is another total red flag. So the DeFi thing is a little bit different, but it is an interesting point.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the biggest red flag of this is the multi-level marketing, as you mentioned, David. You had the same thing with OneCoin with Ruja Agnonotovo, however you pronounce her name, major scam in the crypto space. So these things where you have affiliate marketers coming in, basically these people bring their entire teams of hundreds of thousands of people. They create these huge stadium events. They create so much hype around these things. And they tell people like, this is the next big thing. If you missed out on Bitcoin, this is the next big thing. And people buy into it because of the FOMO. So it's something to be aware of. If it's a affiliate marketing tiered thing, maybe be careful. But Zack, let's wrap that up there.
Let's wrap this thing, y'all. One day you should check out that BBC podcast about OneCoin. It's really good.
So
Naomi,
good.
Will, Jen, David, and Steve, thank you so much for joining us. We will be back.
Oh my gosh, and your
with
dog
the
is in the
hash.
background too.
And that's Primrose.
Look at your
All right,
doggy.
see you from the hash. Bye, guys.